The silence is broken only by the sound of labored breathing, panting, terrified. Imagine yourself there, in the middle of a barren valley, under the scorching Middle Eastern sun. Your throat is dry. Your hands are shaking. Your heart is pounding so hard it feels like it's about to burst. Before him stands a figure that defies human nature. A man. No, not a man. He's a mountain of muscle and metal, 3 meters tall, almost twice the height of an average man. Shoulders as broad as a barn door. Arms as thick as tree trunks. The bronze armor gleams in the sun, blinding his eyes. 60 kilos of molded metal cover every vital inch of his monstrous body. On his legs, bronze greaves that alone would weigh enough to crush a man. And the spear. My God, the spear. Its handle is as thick as a loom's, impossible for ordinary hands to grasp. Its wrought iron spike weighs 15 pounds, more than a newborn baby. When he brandishes it in the air, the sound is like the roar of a wild beast. For 40 days, this giant has been doing the same thing. Every morning at dawn over the Judean hills. Every evening as the shadows lengthen, he descends from the Philistine camp, stands in the center of the valley, and issues his challenge. His voice is a thunderclap that echoes in the mountains, a roar that sends birds fleeing and animals into hiding, a sound that pierces not only the ears, but the soul of every Israeli soldier. And for 40 days, the response has been the same. Silence, silence and fear, silence and shame, silence and despair. No one dares to face him. Israel's bravest warriors, men who have fought dozens of battles, who have faced entire armies. They all retreat when the giant appears. Some pretend to be busy with their weapons. Others suddenly remember urgent duties in the rear. Most simply bow their heads and pray that they won't be picked. But on that day, that fateful day, something different is about to happen. In the nearby hills, a young shepherd approaches. He doesn't know it, but in his saddlebag, he carries more than just bread and cheese for his brothers. He carries the destiny of a nation. He carries the honor of God's name. He carries the courage born not of muscles or armor, but of unwavering faith. In a few hours, this red-haired young man, with hands calloused from tending sheep and a heart shaped by worship in the fields, will do what no trained warrior has ever had the courage to do. He will accept the giant's challenge and he will change history forever.
To truly understand what happened in that valley, we need to go back in time. Not just days or months, but centuries. The year is 1040 BC. It is a time of transition, of profound changes in the ancient Middle East. The great empires of the past, Egypt, Assyria, are in decline. New powers are emerging, and in the midst of this geopolitical turmoil, two nations face off in a struggle that goes far beyond territory. On one side, Israel, God's chosen people, descendants of Abraham, freed from slavery in Egypt just 3 centuries earlier. They conquered the Promised Land under the leadership of Joshua, but they were never able to completely expel all the original inhabitants. For centuries, they lived in an endless cycle: sin, oppression, repentance, deliverance. Judges like Gideon, Samson, and Samuel led them through times of crisis, but now they have something new: a king. Saul, the first king of Israel, was an interesting choice. Tall, handsome, regal in appearance. When Samuel anointed him, he seemed like the perfect choice. The people wanted to be like other nations, to have a king who would lead them into battle. And Saul, at first, lived up to expectations. Victories over the Ammonites, successful battles against other enemies. But something changed. Power went to his head. Disobedience to God became frequent. Impulsive decisions replaced wisdom. Bouts of melancholy and paranoia began to plague him. The Spirit of God that had once empowered him had withdrawn. And Saul knew it. He could feel the emptiness, the absence of the divine presence that had once guided him. On the other side, the Philistines. The Philistines. They were not just another Canaanite people. They were different, special, dangerous. The Philistines were part of the mysterious Sea Peoples, groups that suddenly appeared in the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BC, causing the collapse of entire civilizations. No one knows for sure where they came from. Some say they were from Crete, others from the Aegean Islands. What we do know is that they were formidable warriors and expert seafarers. When they reached the coast of Canaan, they established 5 major cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. Each city was ruled by a Seren, a warrior prince. Together, they formed a powerful military confederacy. But what made the Philistines truly fearsome was not just their military organization, it was their technology, the Iron Revolution. Imagine living in a world where the difference between bronze and iron is the difference between life and death. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, had been the metal of choice for millennia. It was durable and could be shaped into weapons and tools. But it had its limitations. Iron was different, stronger, more durable. Iron weapons could cut through bronze armor like butter. An army equipped with iron had an overwhelming advantage over its enemies. And the Philistines guarded this secret with their lives. They not only knew the technology of forging iron, they monopolized it. In all of Israel, there was not a single blacksmith. If an Israelite needed to sharpen his sickle or repair his plow, he had to go to the Philistines and pay dearly for the service. The biblical text is clear on this. In 1 Samuel 13:19-22, we read, "There was no blacksmith to be found in all the land of Israel, because the Philistines had said, 'Let the Hebrews not make swords or spears.' So all the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen their plowshares, mattocks, axes, and sickles. So on the day of battle, there was no sword or spear found in the hand of any of the people who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and Jonathan, his son." Think about what that means. In a battle, only the king and the prince had proper weapons. The rest of the army fought with adapted farm tools, clubs, slings, and stones. It was like sending men armed with pocket knives to fight tanks. The Vale of Elah. The location of the confrontation was not chosen by chance. The Valley of Elah was one of the main corridors connecting the coastal plain of the Philistines with the mountains of Judea, where the main Israelite cities were located. The valley is named for the large oak trees, Elah in Hebrew, that grew on its slopes. It is a V-shaped valley with steep hills on either side. At its bottom runs a seasonal stream, dry most of the year, but with water during the rainy season. Geographically, it was the perfect location for a decisive battle. Whoever controlled the Valley of Elah would control access to the heart of Israel. The Philistines knew it. Saul knew it. This was where the fate of 2 nations would be decided. The 2 armies were camped on opposite hills, Israel to the north, the Philistines to the south. Between them was the valley. Neither side wanted to go down first. It would be military suicide to attack up the hill against an entrenched enemy. And then the Philistines came up with their solution: single combat. Champion against champion. Winner takes all. The giant of Gath. His name was Goliath, and he came from Gath, one of the 5 Philistine cities. Gath had a special reputation. It was known for producing warriors of extraordinary stature. Archaeologists have found evidence that the people of Gath were, on average, taller than other people in the region. But Goliath was exceptional even by Gath standards. The biblical text says he was 6 cubits and a span tall. Converted to modern measurements, that would be approximately 2.97 meters, almost 3 meters of pure muscle and ferocity. Some ancient manuscripts, including the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and the Dead Sea Scrolls, record his height as 4 cubits and a span, about 6 feet 11 inches, 2.06 meters. Still, in an era when the average height was 5 feet 3 inches, 1.60 meters, he would have been an intimidating giant. But Goliath was not just tall. He was a warrior from his youth, trained in the art of war from childhood. Every muscle in his body was developed for a single purpose: to kill. His hands knew the weight of a sword like a musician knows his instrument. His eyes could size up an opponent in seconds, spotting weaknesses, anticipating moves. And his equipment was a marvel of military technology for the time. The giant's armor. Let's examine piece by piece what made Goliath a walking fortress. The bronze helmet was no mere headgear. It was a work of military art, forged to deflect blows, with cheek pads and a crest that made it appear even taller and more intimidating. The scale armor. Imagine thousands of tiny bronze plates, each the size of a fish scale, overlapping and sewn onto a leather tunic, flexible enough to allow movement, yet strong enough to stop any bronze blade. The weight, 5,000 shekels of bronze, approximately 130 pounds. The armor alone weighed more than many men of the time. Bronze shin guards protected his legs from knees to toes. Each step echoed with the clang of metal. It was protection, but also psychological intimidation. Between his shoulders, a bronze javelin. No ordinary spear, but a specialized throwing weapon, balanced for perfect flight, with a point sharp enough to penetrate shields and armor. And the main spear. The text says that the shaft was like the shaft of a loom. Looms of the time used thick, heavy beams. The iron head, not bronze mind you, but wrought iron, weighed 600 shekels, about 15 pounds. For comparison, a common spear of the time had a head weighing about 1 pound. But Goliath didn't carry all this alone. At his head rode a shield bearer, carrying the tzina, a full-length shield, tall enough to cover a man from head to toe, curved to deflect arrows and spears. The shield bearer wasn't just a carrier, he was an integral part of the war machine. As Goliath charged, the shield-bearer protected him, creating an impenetrable mobile fortress. Meanwhile, in Bethlehem, just 10 miles from the valley of Elah, in the small town of Bethlehem, life went on as usual. Bethlehem, the house of bread, was a modest town known primarily for its fertile fields and pastures. There lived Jesse, a respected man from the tribe of Judah. He had 8 sons, a wealth of wealth in an era when children meant labor and security in old age. The 3 oldest, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shimea, had joined Saul's army. It was an honor and a duty. When the king called, upon them the men of military age responded. But at home, tending the family sheep was the youngest, David, the 8th son, the youngest. In a culture where birthright was everything, being the 8th son meant being last in everything. Last to eat, last to speak, last to be considered. David was different from his brothers. A redhead in a land of dark-haired men, a musician in a family of warriors and farmers, a poet in a world that valued brute strength. His brothers saw him as the dreamer, the boy who spent hours in the fields playing his lyre, composing songs for God. But there was something about David that his family didn't know. Something that had happened in secret, something that would change not only his life, but the fate of the entire nation. The secret anointing months earlier, the prophet Samuel had arrived in Bethlehem. The old prophet, judge and kingmaker, had arrived with a secret mission given to him by God himself, to anoint the next king of Israel. Saul was still on the throne, but God had already rejected him. Disobedience has consequences, and Saul had crossed the line many times. Now God was looking for a man after his own heart. Samuel came to Bethlehem with an excuse, a sacrifice to the Lord. He invited Jesse and his sons. When he saw Eliab, the oldest, tall and imposing, he thought, "Surely this is the Lord's anointed." But God corrected him. "Do not look at his appearance or at the height of his stature, because I have rejected him." The Lord does not see as man sees. Man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. One by one, Jesse's sons passed before Samuel. 7 sons, 7 rejections. Confused, Samuel asked, "Are these all your sons?" "Well," Jesse replied, almost as an afterthought, "there is still the youngest, but he is tending the sheep." "Send for him," Samuel ordered. "We will not sit down until he arrives." And when David came in, dirty from the field, smelling of sheep, with the lyre slung over his back, God whispered to Samuel, "This is he. Arise and anoint him." There, in front of his father and brothers, without their fully understanding the meaning, Samuel poured the oil on David's head. The oil ran down his red hair, down his young face, down his lean shoulders. And with the oil came something else, the Spirit of the Lord. From that day on, David changed. There was a new confidence, a new boldness, a new intimacy with God. But there was also wisdom to wait. He returned to the sheep, he returned to the fields, he returned to his songs, anointed as king but still a shepherd. Chosen by God, but still the youngest. Destined for the throne, but still obedient to his father. And it was this obedience that would lead him to his destiny. The morning of departure. The sun had not yet fully risen when Jesse called David. The old father was worried. 3 of his sons were at war, and he had not heard from them for weeks. The little information that had come in spoke of a stalemate, of a Philistine giant, of fear and paralysis in the Israelite camp. "David, my son," Jesse said, holding a bag of roasted grain and counting the loaves. "Take this to your brothers, 1 ephah of grain and 10 loaves of bread, and these 10 cheeses take to the commander of their unit." David knew the true purpose of the journey. It wasn't just about food. Jesse wanted information. How were his sons? Were they injured? Were they alive? "See how your brothers are doing," Jesse continued, "and bring me some assurance that they are well." David woke up early the next morning. He carefully left the sheep in the care of another shepherd. Each sheep had a name. Each had its own personality. There was the stubborn one that always tried to get away, the gentle one that always stayed close, the leader that the others followed. Leaving them was not easy, but obedience to the Father came first. He shouldered his supplies and began the journey. 10 miles was not an impossible distance, but it was not easy either. The path wound through the Judean hills, rising and falling, crossing dry streams and skirting rocks. As he walked, David sang. It was his habit, his way of passing the time and connecting with God. Perhaps he sang one of the psalms he would later compose. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Little did he know that within a few hours, the shepherd would become a warrior, a rival at the battlefield. The sound came before the sight. First, the distant murmur of thousands of voices. Then, the clang of metal, the neighing of horses, the shouting of commands. The smell came next. Sweat, leather, smoke from campfires. The unmistakable scent of many men living together for a long time. When David finally crested the last hill, the sight took his breath away. The valley stretched out below, and on every slope was an army. Thousands of tents dotted the hills like mushrooms after rain. Banners fluttered in the wind. Soldiers moved like ants, each with his own task. David ran down looking for the camp of Judah, where his brothers would be. The guard stopped him at the entrance, but when David explained his mission and showed them the supplies, he was allowed to enter. The camp was an organized chaos. Soldiers sharpened weapons, repaired armor, prepared food. Some rolled dice, trying to forget their fear. Others prayed silently. They all had the same look on their faces, a mixture of boredom and terror, the mark of men waiting for a battle that could come at any moment. David finally found the unity of his brothers. Eliab saw him first. and his expression was not one of joy. "What are you doing here?" was his greeting, not "hello, brother," or "nice to see you," but immediate suspicion. "Father sent me with supplies," David replied, handing over the items. "He wants to know how you are doing." Before the conversation could continue, a commotion broke out in the camp. Soldiers rushed to their positions. Commanders shouted orders. The entire army began to form into battle lines. "What's going on?" David asked. "It's time," a nearby soldier replied, fear evident in his voice. "He's coming." The giant's challenge. David followed the stream of soldiers to the front line. He managed to squeeze through the men until he could see the valley, and then he saw it. Goliath. Even from a distance, the giant was impressive. He descended from the opposite hill with earth-shaking strides. His shield-bearer walked in front, barely able to carry the enormous shield. Goliath's armor gleamed like fire in the morning sun. He stopped in the center of the valley, in the same place he had been for 40 days. He planted his spear in the ground, the tip digging deep into the earth with the impact. Then he took a deep breath and shouted, "Goliath, why do you go out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man and send him down to fight with me." His voice echoed through the valley, each word clear as the tolling of a bell. David watched, fascinated, as the giant continued. "Goliath, if he can fight me and kill me, we will be his servants. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will be our servants and serve us." The giant paused dramatically, looking along the Israelite lines, his eyes searching for any sign of movement, any volunteer brave enough to accept his challenge. "Goliath, I challenge the ranks of Israel today. Give me a man so we can fight each other." The silence that followed was deafening. David looked around, expecting to see someone step forward. Surely among all these warriors, someone would accept the challenge. Where were the mighty men of Israel? Where were the champions of the living God? But what he saw shocked him. Fear, pure, undisguised fear. Grown men, seasoned warriors, trembling like children. Some took a step back, as if the giant's mere gaze could kill them. Others lowered their heads, avoiding any eye contact that could be interpreted as volunteering. And then something happened inside David. A righteous indignation began to bubble up in his chest. How dare this uncircumcised pagan defy the armies of the living God? How dare he blaspheme the Holy One of Israel? And how dare the soldiers of Israel allow such an affront? David's indignation. David couldn't contain himself. He turned to the soldiers beside him. "David, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" Soldiers looked at him in surprise. Who was this young man who spoke so boldly? One of them replied, "Do you see that man? The king has promised great riches to whoever kills him. He will give his daughter in marriage and exempt his father's family in Israel from taxes." David absorbed the information, but it wasn't the reward that motivated him. It was the affront to God that bothered him. "David, what will be done to the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" He asked the other soldiers the same question, always getting the same answer about the rewards. But the more he talked, the more his indignation grew, and the more his indignation grew, the more the soldiers began to pay attention to him. Word of their questions began to spread through the camp. "There's a young man asking questions about the giant. He seems interested in fighting. He keeps talking about the honor of God." Eventually these words reached the ears of Eliab, his older brother. The confrontation with Eliab marched up to where David stood, his face red with anger. "Eliab, why did you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the desert? I know your pride and the wickedness of your heart. You came only to see the battle." The accusation was cutting and unfair. David had come in obedience to his father, not out of morbid curiosity. But Eliab could not see beyond his own fear and shame. Here was his younger brother, the shepherd, speaking boldly while he, the warrior, trembled with fear. "David, what have I done now? I can't even speak." David walked away from his brother and kept asking questions, kept expressing his indignation. And the more he talked, the more attention he attracted. Soldiers began to crowd around him. Officers began to take note. Finally, someone ran to the royal tent. "Your Majesty," the messenger said to Saul, "there is a young man in the camp who keeps asking about the Philistine. He seems interested in fighting." Saul, desperate after 40 days of humiliation, clung to any hope. "Bring him here immediately." The audience with the king, the royal tent, was a stark contrast to the rest of the camp. Rugs covered the floor, fine furniture, a folding chair, a table with maps, chests with royal belongings was provided. But even here the tension was palpable. Saul sat in his chair, but there was nothing regal about his posture. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. The weight of failure, of daily humiliation, had taken its toll. When David entered, Saul looked him over. A boy, barely out of his teens. No armor, no visible weapons, no warriors. Bearing, for a moment, the hope that had arisen died. But then David spoke. "David, let no one be discouraged because of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight with him." The confidence in the young man's voice was astonishing. There was no bravado, no trace of false heroism, just a calm, unshakable certainty. "Saul, you cannot go up against this Philistine to fight with him. You are just a boy, and he has been a warrior since his youth." It was the logical answer. Goliath had probably killed his first man before David was born. Every day of the giant's life had been devoted to the art of war. And here was a young shepherd boy, with no military training, no experience in combat, volunteering to do what trained warriors would not dare. But David had an answer that Saul did not expect. A pastor's credentials. "David, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I would go after it, strike it, and rescue the sheep from its mouth. When it turned against me, I would grab it by the beard, strike it, and kill it." Saul leaned forward. This wasn't the bluster of a young man trying to impress. There was too much specificity, too much detail. The boy was speaking from real experience. David continued, his voice gaining strength. "David, your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." And then came the declaration of faith that would change everything. "David, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." There was something about the way he said, "the Lord," not as a distant concept or an impersonal force, but as someone he knew intimately, someone he trusted completely. Saul was silent for a long moment. What choice did he have? 40 days of humiliation, 40 days of his best warriors refusing the challenge, and here was someone, however unlikely, willing to fight. "Saul, go, and may the Lord be with you." Preparations for battle. Saul stood, energized for the first time in weeks. If the boy was going to fight, at least he would fight properly equipped. "Bring my armor," he ordered the servants. Saul's armor was the best money could buy. A polished bronze helmet, a flexible but strong coat of mail, greaves and arm guards, and of course a sword, one of the few iron swords in all of Israel. Piece by piece, they dressed David. His helmet was too big, sliding down over his eyes. His chainmail hung down to his knees. His shin guards barely fit his thinner legs. David tried to take a few steps. It was like trying to walk while wearing a house. Every movement was awkward, forced. The sword knocked uncomfortably against his leg. The helmet limited his vision. He stopped and stood there for a moment, considering. Then, with the same calm decision he had shown before, he began to remove his armor. David, I can't go with this because I'm not used to it. Saul's officers were horrified. Going without armor was suicide. But David knew something they didn't. The battle would not be won with armor or swords. It would be won the way he had always won, with a shepherd's simple tools and faith in the living God. The choice of stones, David left the royal tent and walked purposefully toward the valley. Soldiers stepped aside to let him pass, a mixture of admiration and pity on their faces. Many probably thought they were watching a young man walking to his death. But David did not go straight to the battlefield. First, he went down to the stream that ran through the bottom of the valley. There he knelt down by the water. The creek bed was strewn with stones, thousands of them, polished by the water over countless seasons. But David did not pick up the first ones he saw. With the care of a connoisseur, he examined stone after stone. Too angular, it wouldn't fly straight. Too light, it wouldn't have enough impact. Too big, it wouldn't fit snugly in the sling. Too small, it might not have the strength to penetrate. One by one, he selected 5 stones, each one perfectly round, perfectly smooth, the perfect weight. As he chose, memories flooded his mind. How many times had he done this before? How many hours had he spent practicing in the fields, perfecting his aim? He could hit a branch at 50 paces. He could startle a predator at 100. The sling wasn't just a tool, it was an extension of his arm, as familiar as his own hand. 5 stones. Why 5? Perhaps it was a precautionary measure. If he missed the first shot, he would have another chance. Perhaps it was a prophecy. Some say Goliath had 4 brothers, all giants, and David was preparing to take them all on if necessary. Or perhaps 5 represented God's grace, the number 5 in Hebrew numerology signifying divine favor. With the stones safely tucked into his shepherd's bag, David stood up. He picked up his staff, the same one he used to guide sheep, to ward off predators, to support himself on long walks. In his hand, he held his sling, a strip of leather or braided wool, with a pouch in the middle to hold the stone. Equipped with the tools of a shepherd, not a warrior, David began walking toward the giant. The final confrontation. Silence fell over both armies as they saw David emerge from the Israelite lines. On one side, the Philistines began to laugh. Was this a joke? Was this scrawny kid the best Israel had to offer? On the other side, the Israelis held their breath. Some began to pray fervently. Others looked away, not wanting to witness the massacre that was sure to come. Goliath, who had started back to his lines thinking that another day would pass without a response, heard the commotion. He turned and saw David approaching. For a moment, the giant was confused. Where was the armor? Where was the sword and shield? All he saw was a boy with a staff and a shepherd's bag. The confusion quickly turned to anger. Goliath, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? The giant's voice thundered across the valley, filled with indignation. In his culture, being compared to a dog was the ultimate insult. And here was this boy coming at him as if he were chasing away a stray animal. Goliath called upon his gods, cursing David with every curse he knew. Goliath, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. It was more than a threat, it was a promise. Goliath would not only kill this insolent young man, he would leave his body unburied, food for vultures and jackals, the ultimate humiliation. But David did not back down. He did not hesitate. Instead, his voice rang out clear and strong across the valley, every word charged with absolute conviction, the declaration of faith. David, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. The change in the atmosphere was palpable. This was not the bravado of a young man trying to appear brave. It was the declaration of a man who knew with absolute certainty in whom he had placed his trust. David continued, his voice growing in power. David, this very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I will strike you down and take your head off, and I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and the wild animals of the earth. Now it was David making promises. He would not only defeat Goliath, he would behead the giant with his own sword. Not just one Philistine would die, the entire army would be defeated. David, and all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel, and all this assembly will know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. The moment of truth. Goliath had heard enough. With a roar of rage, he began to advance. Each step shook the earth. His spear was poised for the killing blow. His shield-bearer hurried to keep up, trying to keep the massive shield in position. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of backing away or standing still, David started running toward the giant. It was the last thing Goliath expected. Victims either ran away or were paralyzed with fear. They did not run toward their deaths. As he ran, David's hand went to his bag. His fingers, honed by years of practice, found a stone. In a fluid motion born of thousands of repetitions, he placed the stone in the sling. The world seemed to slow down. David planted his left foot, his body twisting with the force of the movement. The sling began its arc over his head, once, twice, 3 times. The familiar hum filled his ears. Goliath was 30 paces away, 25, 20. At the perfect moment, just as he had done hundreds of times before with predators threatening his flock, David released one of the sling straps. The stone flew like a divinely guided missile. Goliath, his vision perhaps impaired by gigantism, his reflexes slowed by the weight of his armor, his attention focused on the running boy instead of the spinning sling, never saw it coming. The impact. The stone struck Goliath square in the center of his forehead, the only place not protected by his armor. The sound of the impact, stone on bone, echoed through the valley. For a moment Goliath stood there, an expression of utter surprise on his face. His eyes, which moments before had burned with murderous fury, went glassy. The spear fell from his suddenly weak fingers. Like a great tree felled by a lumberjack, Goliath began to fall. First his knees buckled, then his immense body lurched forward. With a crash that seemed to shake the very earth, the giant fell face down to the ground. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one breathed. Israelites and Philistines alike stared in utter shock at the impossible scene before them. The invincible had been defeated. The giant had fallen. And there, standing alone on the battlefield, was a young shepherd boy with a sling in his hand. The final blow, but David was not finished. With the same calm determination he had shown throughout the confrontation, he ran up to Goliath's fallen body. The giant was still breathing, unconscious but alive. David had no sword of his own. He had refused Saul's, but Goliath had one. Reaching the giant's body, David grabbed the hilt of the massive sword. It was heavy, made for Goliath's massive hands, but the adrenaline gave David strength he normally wouldn't have had. With effort, he pulled his sword from its sheath. The iron blade gleamed in the sun. The same weapon Goliath had planned to use to dismember David. Gripping the sword in both hands, David raised it high. For a moment he stood there, the young shepherd standing over the fallen giant, the enemy's sword in his hands. It was an image that would be forever etched in the memories of all who witnessed it. Then, with one mighty blow, David fulfilled his promise. Goliath's head rolled away from his body. David reached down and grabbed the head, by the hair, holding it high for both armies to see. Blood dripped, but David didn't care. This was proof of victory. This was vindication of God's name. And then the silence was broken. The eruption of battle. The cry began on the Israeli side. First 1 man, then 10, then 100, then 1,000. A roar of triumph that must have been heard as far away as Jerusalem. 40 days of fear and frustration had exploded into a war cry that made the very heavens tremble. On the Philistine side, the cry was different. Terror, absolute panic. Their champion, their invincible hero, lay dead. And if a boy with a sling could kill Goliath, what would the Israelite army do with them? The stampede began immediately. Philistines threw down their weapons and ran. Officers tried to maintain order, but it was useless. When panic grips an army, there is no stopping it. Israelite commander: "After them, don't let any of them escape, for the honor of Israel and the glory of the Lord." The Israelite army, energized by the impossible victory they had witnessed, pursued the Philistines all the way back to their cities. The pursuit stretched for miles, from the valley of Elah to the gates of Gath and Ekron. Intriguing archaeological questions. But now, 3,000 years later, archaeological discoveries raise fascinating questions about this story. Excavations at Tel Safi, identified as the ancient Gath hometown of Goliath, have revealed intriguing evidence. Archaeologists have found a massive destruction dating back to the period of David. More interestingly, they have found evidence that the inhabitants of Gath were, in fact, exceptionally tall by the standards of the time. Dr. Aaron Mayer, who is leading the excavations, discovered a pottery fragment with 2 words written in Proto-Canaanite script, ALWT and WLT. Some scholars suggest that these may be related to the name Goliath, indicating that the giant was not just a mythical figure, but a real person known in his time. Goliath's medical condition: modern doctors, analyzing the biblical description of Goliath, have suggested a fascinating possibility: pituitary gigantism. This condition, caused by a tumor in the pituitary gland, results in extreme growth, but it also brings serious complications. Vision problems. The tumor can press on the optic nerves, causing double vision or loss of peripheral vision. Goliath may literally not have seen the stone coming. Slow movements. People with gigantism often have slower reflexes and difficulty with quick movements. Muscle weakness. Despite the size, muscles can be weak in proportion to body weight. Balance problems. The altered center of gravity makes falls more likely. If Goliath suffered from this condition, his intimidating appearance hid significant vulnerabilities. What seemed like an insurmountable advantage, his size, may have been his greatest weakness. The 5 stones, deep symbolism. Why did David take 5 stones if he only needed 1? Theories abound. Theory 1, the 5 giants. In 2 Samuel 21:15-22, we read of 4 other Philistine giants, all described as relatives of Goliath. Laphi, Sibbecai, another unnamed man with 6 toes on each hand and foot, and a 4th giant. Was David prepared to take on the entire family if necessary? Theory 2, the Pentateuch. The 5 stones would represent the 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. David defeated Goliath with the word of God, symbolically represented in the stones. Theory 3, the grace of God. In Hebrew numerical symbolism, 5 represents grace. The 5 stones were a reminder that victory would come not by strength, but by divine grace. Theory 4, complete preparation. David was an experienced shepherd. He knew that in real combat you can make mistakes. There can be interference. The first stone may not be enough. He was prepared, not presumptuous. Prophetic connections. But most intriguing of all are the prophetic connections in this story. 1,000 years after David, another young man from Bethlehem would face an even greater giant. Not a giant of flesh and blood, but the spiritual giants of sin and death. Like David, he would be despised and rejected. Like David, he would face the enemy without conventional weapons. Like David, he would win through what appeared to be weakness. The stone that felled Goliath prefigured the stone the builders rejected that would become the cornerstone. The shepherd who became king pointed to the good shepherd who would reign forever. Surprising historical evidence. Egyptian texts of the time mention the Peliset, Philistines, as part of the sea peoples who invaded Egypt. Descriptions speak of exceptionally tall warriors among them. An Egyptian medical papyrus, the Ebers Papyrus, describes a condition that appears to be gigantism, including vision problems and weakness in the extremities. Exactly what we would expect if Goliath had this condition. Later, Assyrian reliefs show the siege of Philistine cities. The defenders are depicted as noticeably taller than other peoples in the region. Artistic exaggeration or cultural memory of a lineage of giants. The return of the hero. When the battle was over and the Philistines were chased back to their cities, David returned to the battlefield. He still carried Goliath's head, the bloody trophy of his victory. Saul, who had been watching everything from afar, could hardly believe what he had witnessed. He called Abner, the commander of his army. Saul, Abner, whose son is that young man? It was an odd question. Saul had just talked to David, had tried to clothe him in his armor, but the shock of what had happened, perhaps combined with his growing mental problems, left him confused. Abner, I swear by your life, O king, I do not know. Saul, find out whose son he is. When David approached, still holding Goliath's head, Saul questioned him directly. Saul, young man, whose son are you? David, I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem. It was at this moment that Jonathan, Saul's son, saw David for the first time, and something extraordinary happened. The Bible tells us that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as himself. It was the beginning of one of the most famous friendships in history, a friendship that would survive jealousy, assassination attempts, civil war, and tragedy. The rise of a star, news of David's victory, spread like wildfire. In every city and town, the story was told and retold, growing with each telling. When the army returned, the women took to the streets with tambourines and dances, and they sang a song that would change the course of history. Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s. It was a song of celebration, but to Saul, every note was like a knife to his heart. The people were elevating David above him. The shepherd boy was becoming more popular than the king. Saul, to himself, they gave David 10,000s, but to me only thousands. What more do you need but the kingdom? From that day on, Saul looked at David with suspicion. The national hero had become a threat to the throne. The savior of Israel had become the king's personal enemy. Years of trial. What followed were years of deadly cat and mouse. Saul tried to kill David multiple times. He threw a spear at him while David played the harp to calm his troubled spirits. He sent him on suicide missions, hoping the Philistines would kill him. He offered his daughter in marriage, but demanded an impossible dowry, 100 Philistine foreskins. He chased him through the desert with an entire army, but in each case, David escaped. Not because he was smarter or stronger than Saul, but because the Lord was with him. During these years of exile, David raised a band of warriors, men who were in trouble, in debt, discontented. About 400 men at first, growing to 600. These would become his mighty men, the military elite who would help him build an empire. Twice, David had the opportunity to kill Saul, once in a cave, once in a camp at night. Both times, he refused to stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed. This restraint, this refusal to take power by force, revealed the character God had seen when he chose the young shepherd boy. The death of Saul and the rise of David. The final tragedy came at Mount Gilboa. The Philistines, reeling from their defeat in the valley of Elah, mounted a massive invasion. Saul, desperate and abandoned by God, consulted a medium, violating his own laws. In the ensuing battle, disaster struck. 3 of Saul's sons, including the noble Jonathan, were killed. Saul himself, seriously wounded by archers, fell on his own sword rather than be captured. When the news reached David, his reaction surprised everyone. Instead of celebrating the death of his persecutor, he tore his clothes and mourned. He composed one of the most beautiful elegies in literature. How the mighty have fallen! Saul and Jonathan, beloved and dear, neither in life nor in death were they parted. Swifter than eagles they were, stronger than lions. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan was slain on your high places. I am in anguish for you, my brother Jonathan. You were most kind to me. Your love was exceeding, surpassing the love of women. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war perished. The reign of the shepherd king. At age 30, David finally became king, first over Judah, then over all Israel. The shepherd had completed his journey to the throne. His first great act as king of all Israel was to conquer Jerusalem from the Jebusites. The city, considered impregnable, fell through a surprise attack through the water system. David made it his capital, calling it the City of David. He brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, dancing before it with total abandon, without regard for royal dignity. When his wife Michal criticized him, he replied, "It was before the Lord, who chose me instead of your father. And I will make myself even more contemptible than this." The kingdom prospered under David. He expanded the borders from Egypt to the Euphrates. He organized the government, established a professional army, and created a royal court. But most importantly, he maintained the heart of a worshipper, the warrior psalmist. Throughout his reign, David continued to write psalms. These song poems reveal the depth of his relationship with God. Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, written by one who knew both a shepherd's care and divine protection. Psalm 51. His prayer of repentance after his sin with Bathsheba, showing that even the man after God's own heart was fallible and in need of forgiveness. Psalm 139. A meditation on the omniscience and omnipresence of God, written by one who had experienced the divine presence in the fields of Bethlehem and in the palaces of Jerusalem. In all, 73 psalms are attributed to David. They cover the whole range of human experience, joy and sorrow, victory and defeat, praise and lament. For 3,000 years, they have been the prayer book of God's people. The eternal legacy. David reigned for 40 years, 7 years in Hebron over Judah, 33 years in Jerusalem over all Israel. When he died, he left a unified, prosperous, and respected kingdom. But more than that, he left a spiritual legacy that endures to this day. God made a covenant with David, promising that his throne would be established forever. This promise would find its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ, often called the Son of David. The parallels are remarkable. Both were born in Bethlehem. Both were anointed, but had to wait to reign fully. Both were rejected and persecuted before being exalted. Both conquered through what appeared to be weakness. Both established eternal kingdoms. But there were differences too. David was a man of war. Jesus is the Prince of Peace. David shed much blood. Jesus shed his own blood. David built an earthly kingdom. Jesus builds a heavenly kingdom. Or voce, or vit today. If you visit Israel today, you can go to the Elah Valley. It hasn't changed much in 3,000 years. The same hills rise on both sides. The same stream runs through the valley floor, dry in summer, flowing in winter. Tourists kneel in the stream, searching for 5 smooth stones to take home. Guides point out where armies were positioned, where Goliath would have stood, where David ran to meet him. It's a surprisingly ordinary place. There's nothing grand or majestic about it, just an ordinary valley in a country full of valleys. And perhaps that's appropriate. Because the lesson of the Valley of Elah is that God does extraordinary things in ordinary places, through ordinary people who have extraordinary faith. We've all faced giants. They may not be 10 feet tall or wear bronze armor, but they're just as intimidating. The giant of disease, the diagnosis that steals your breath, the prognosis that feels like a death sentence, the chronic pain that won't go away. Like Goliath, it challenges you every day, mocking your weakness, proclaiming your inevitable destruction. The giant of financial failure. Bills that pile up, like Goliath's armor, debts that seem impossible to overcome, unemployment that threatens everything you've built. Every morning and afternoon, this giant screams its threats. The broken relationship giant, the marriage that seems beyond repair, the prodigal son who won't come home, the betrayal that cuts so deep you can't imagine forgiving. This giant seems invincible because it lives inside your own home. The giant of addiction, the habit that has become your master, the substance that promises relief but delivers slavery, the behavior you have sworn to stop 1,000 times. Like Goliath, this giant knows your every weakness and exploits it without mercy. The giant of fear, fear of the future, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of death. This may be the most paralyzing giant of all, because it attacks the very faith you need to fight. David's lessons. What does David teach us about facing our giants? Lesson 1. Righteous indignation is appropriate. David was not intimidated by Goliath because he saw the situation from God's perspective. This pagan was challenging the living God. The issue was not the size of Goliath, but the size of the insult to God. When you face your giants, it's okay to be angry. Sickness is not part of God's original plan. Broken relationships are not what He wants. Addiction is a perversion of God's good design. Be angry at the giant, but channel that anger into faithful action. Lesson 2. Past experiences are preparation. David didn't wake up one morning and decide to fight a giant. Years of caring for sheep, protecting them from predators, had prepared him. The lion and the bear were God's training ground. Look back over your life. What lions and bears has God helped you defeat? What past victories can give you confidence for the present battle? God wastes no experience. Every challenge you have overcome has been preparation for this moment. Lesson 3. Use your own weapons. David refused Saul's armor because he was not accustomed to it. He fought with the tools he knew: staff, sling, and stones. Don't try to fight your giants with someone else's weapons. Use the gifts God has given you. Use the tools you are familiar with. Be authentic in your approach. God doesn't need you to be Saul. He needs you to be you. Lesson 4. Run towards the giant. This may be the most counterintuitive lesson. When Goliath charged, David ran toward him. He didn't wait for the giant to come to him. He took the initiative. Stop running from your giants. Stop waiting for them to go away. With God on your side, run toward them. Face the diagnosis. Address the financial issue. Start the difficult conversation. Seek help for your addiction. Action fueled by faith is more powerful than paralysis fueled by fear. Lesson 5. Give God the glory. David made it clear from the beginning. This battle was about God's honor, not his own. That all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. When you face your giants, make it about something bigger than yourself. How can your victory bring glory to God? How can your story encourage others? When we take the focus off ourselves and put it on God, we find strength we didn't know we had. The same promise David claimed is available to you. The battle is the Lord's. This doesn't mean you don't have a role to play. David still had to choose the stones, swing the sling, and release at the right moment. But it does mean that the outcome doesn't depend on your strength, your wisdom, or your skill. It depends on God's faithfulness. The God who guided David's stone still guides today. The God who felled Goliath still falls giants. The God who turned a shepherd into a king still transforms ordinary lives into extraordinary testimonies. So here's the challenge. What's your Goliath? Name it. Don't let it remain a vague, formless threat. Be specific. And then do what David did. Remember who your God is. Not a distant concept, but the living God who cares passionately about you. Record past victories. Make a list of the lions and bears that God has helped you overcome. Gather your stones. What resources has God already given you? What spiritual weapons are at your disposal? Prayer, God's word, faith, community, spiritual gifts. These are your smooth stones. Run to battle. Stop procrastinating. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. With faith in God, take action today. Claim the promise. The battle is the Lord's. Repeat it until you believe it. Proclaim it until fear is gone. 1,000 years after David, another young man faced even greater giants. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus faced the giant of human sin. On the cross, he faced the giant of death. In the tomb, it seemed as if the giants had won. But on the third day, the stone was rolled away, not to let Jesus out, but to let the witnesses in and see that the tomb was empty. The biggest giant of all had been defeated. And because Jesus defeated the ultimate giant, we are assured of victory over our giants. We do not fight for victory, we fight from victory. The battle has already been won. We are merely claiming territory that already belongs to our King. The story of David and Goliath is not just a story about a brave boy who defeated a big bully. It is a story about the nature of God and how He works in the world. It is a story that tells us that God sees potential where others see limitations, that He chooses the improbable to do the impossible, that He delights in using the weak to shame the strong, fools to shame the wise, the despised to bring to nothing the things that are. It's a story that promises that no giant is too big when God is on your side. That faith the size of a smooth pebble can topple mountains of opposition. That the same God who was with David in the valley is with you in your valley today. So grab your 5 stones, swing your sling, run towards your giant, for the battle is the Lord's. And He never lost a fight. May the God of David be your God today. May the faith of David be your faith. May the victory of David be your victory. In the name of the one who defeated the greatest giant of all, in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of David and Son of God. Amen.